March 2024, when ranch owner Jake Sullivan told the matchmaker he'd rather lose everything than marry a stranger. He meant it, until a mysterious woman showed up at his gates with nothing but a worn suitcase and a claim that changed everything. Could the bride he never wanted be the only one who could save what he was about to lose? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana sun hung low over the Broken Arrow Ranch, casting long shadows across the dried-up pastures that stretched toward the distant mountains. Jake Sullivan stood on the weathered porch of his family's 100-year-old ranch house, dirt caked on his boots and exhaustion written across his weathered face. At 34, he'd spent the last decade trying to keep his grandfather's legacy alive, and he was losing. The letter from First Montana Bank sat crumpled in his jacket pocket, its words burned into his memory. 60 days. That's all he had left before foreclosure proceedings would begin. 6 generations of Sullivans had worked this land, and it would die with him. His phone buzzed for the 4th time that morning. Jake didn't need to look at the screen to know it was his mother calling from her retirement home in Billings. She'd been relentless since she'd heard about the bank's ultimatum, suggesting everything from selling off parcels of land to taking out more loans he couldn't afford. But her latest idea was the most absurd yet. Just meet with Mrs. Chen, his mother had pleaded during yesterday's call. She's helped dozens of families in situations like ours. Traditional solutions, Jake, the kind that built this country, traditional solutions. His mother's euphemism for arranged marriages made Jake's jaw clench. The idea that some matchmaker could solve his problems with a strategic wedding felt like something out of a period drama, not modern-day Montana. He'd rather face the bank's lawyers than parade himself in front of wealthy families looking for a rugged cowboy husband for their daughters. The sound of an engine broke through his thoughts. Jake squinted toward the main road, watching dust kick up behind an approaching vehicle. It wasn't the feed delivery truck he'd been expecting. This was a sleek black sedan that looked wildly out of place on the rural highway leading to his property. His border collie, Scout, barked from beneath the porch, sensing Jake's tension. "Easy, boy," Jake muttered, his hand instinctively moving to adjust his worn Stetson as the sedan turned onto his private drive. The car rolled to a stop near the barn, its engine purring softly before cutting off. Jake remained on the porch, arms crossed, as the driver's door opened. A woman emerged, and Jake felt his irritation spike immediately. She was clearly not from around here. Designer jeans that had probably never seen actual ranch work, a cream-colored blouse that would be ruined within an hour of real labor, and sunglasses that probably cost more than his monthly feed bill. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she moved with the kind of careful precision that city people always had when they first encountered rural terrain. "Mr. Sullivan?" she called out, her voice carrying across the yard with surprising confidence. Jake didn't move from the porch. "Depends on who's asking." The woman approached slowly, pulling off her sunglasses to reveal sharp green eyes that studied him with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe late 20s, but there was something about her bearing that suggested she was used to being taken seriously. "My name is Elena Reeves," she said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "I believe your mother mentioned I might be coming." Jake's stomach dropped. "You're from the matchmaker." "Mrs. Chen is my aunt," Elena corrected, a slight edge to her voice. "But no, I'm not here about that. At least not exactly. Then why are you here?" Jake's tone was harsher than he'd intended, but he was tired of games. "Because I've got about 100 things to do today, and standing here talking to city folk ain't one of them." Elena didn't flinch at his rudeness. Instead, she reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out a folder. "Satibeturs, Adila. I'm here because your mother is desperate to save this ranch, and because my aunt made a promise to help." But I'm not some pampered socialite looking for a country experience, Mr. Sullivan. I'm a financial analyst who specializes in agricultural debt restructuring. Jake stared at her, caught off guard. "Oh, what? I help failing farms and ranches find ways to stay solvent," Elena explained, climbing the first 2 steps uninvited. "I've worked with over 40 properties in the last 5 years, across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. Your mother reached out to my aunt, who reached out to me. I've already reviewed your financial statements, the ones you submitted to the bank last quarter. The casual way she mentioned having access to his private financial information made Jake's blood boil. "You had no right." "Your mother gave permission," Eleanor interrupted calmly. "And frankly, Mr. Sullivan, you don't have time to be precious about privacy. According to my analysis, you're approximately 6 weeks away from losing everything. Your cattle operation is underwater. Your equipment is outdated and breaking down faster than you can repair it. And your water situation is critical." Jake descended the porch steps until he was at eye level with her, his jaw tight. "I don't know who you think you are, coming onto my property and telling me about my own ranch. I'm someone who can help," Elena said, meeting his glare without backing down. "If you'll let me. Help how? By finding me a rich wife?" Jake laughed bitterly. "Thanks, but I'd rather lose the ranch with my dignity intact." Elena's expression hardened. "Your grandfather built this place from nothing during the Depression. Your father expanded it during some of the hardest years in ranching history, and you're going to let it die because you're too proud to consider unconventional solutions." The mention of his grandfather hit a nerve. Jake took a step back, his hands clenching into fists. "You don't know anything about my family. I know that 3 generations of Sullivans fought to keep this land," Elena replied, her voice softer now. "I know that you've been working yourself into the ground trying to do it alone. And I know that sometimes asking for help isn't weakness. It's the smartest thing you can do." Jake wanted to tell her to leave. Every instinct screamed at him to send this presumptuous city woman back where she came from. But something in her eyes stopped him, not pity, but understanding. Like maybe she'd seen this scenario play out before and knew how it ended. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked finally, hating how defeated he sounded. Elena opened the folder she'd been holding. "I need 3 days to conduct a full assessment of your operation. I'll examine your land, your livestock, your equipment, your water rights, and your financial situation. Then I'll provide you with a comprehensive plan, one that doesn't necessarily involve my aunt's matchmaking services, despite what your mother might hope. And if I say no, then in 6 weeks you'll be having this same conversation with bank lawyers instead of someone who actually wants to help you succeed." Elena's gaze drifted past him to the ranch house, taking in the peeling paint and sagging gutter. "This place has good bones, Mr. Sullivan, but bones aren't enough. You need a strategy." Jake studied her for a long moment, trying to figure out her angle. Nobody offered help without wanting something in return. "What's in this for you?" "My fee is 15% of whatever money I save you over the next 2 years, Elena said bluntly. "If I can't save the ranch, you pay nothing. If I can, then we both win." It was hard to argue with that logic, even as Jake's pride bristled at the idea of this stranger poking through every aspect of his failing operation. But what choice did he have? The feed store had already put him on credit hold. The veterinarian who'd known his family for decades had started asking for payment up front. And the bank's foreclosure notice was ticking down like a time bomb. 3 days, Jake said finally. "But you sleep in the guest cottage, not in my house. And you don't touch anything without asking me first." Elena nodded, extending her hand. "Deal." Jake shook it, noting the firm grip that surprised him. Maybe she wasn't as soft as she looked. "Where should I park?" Elena asked, glancing back at her sedan. "Barn's fine, but you're going to want to trade that car for something with actual clearance. Roads get rough around here." Jake turned back toward the house, then paused. "Guest cottage is around back. It's been a while since anyone used it, so can't promise it'll be fancy." "I'm not here for fancy, Mr. Sullivan." "It's Jake," he said gruffly. "If you're going to be here for 3 days, Might as well drop the formality. Elena, she replied, with the first hint of a smile he'd seen. Though my aunt calls me Ellie. Jake grunted in acknowledgement and headed inside, letting the screen door slam behind him. Through the window, he watched Elena return to her car, making a phone call before grabbing a practical-looking backpack from the trunk. At least she'd had the sense to bring something other than designer luggage. Scout trotted over to investigate the newcomer, tail wagging cautiously. To Jake's surprise, Eleanor crouched down immediately, letting the dog sniff her hand before scratching behind his ears. Scout's tail started wagging harder. The traitor! Jake's phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Did she arrive? His mother's voice was breathless with hope. Yeah, she's here, Jake replied, watching Elena make her way toward the guest cottage. Though I'm not sure what you expected her to accomplish in 3 days, Elena is very good at what she does, sweetheart. Her aunt told me she saved ranches that were in worse shape than yours. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hard to imagine worse, Jake muttered. Just give her a chance. That's all I ask. His mother paused. And Jake, be nice. She's doing this as a favor. She's doing it for 15%, Jake corrected. It's business, Ma, nothing more. After hanging up, Jake moved to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of hours-old coffee. Through the window above the sink, he could see Elena entering the guest cottage. Within minutes, the windows were open, letting in the Montana air. He had 3 days to endure this intrusion. 3 days of having his failures catalogued and analyzed by someone who probably thought she could fix everything with spreadsheets and business plans. Jake had been ranching his entire life. He knew the reality. Sometimes the land just broke you. But as he watched the sun continue its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Jake couldn't quite silence the small voice in his head that wondered, what if she actually could help? The next morning arrived with the harsh reality of ranch work. Jake was up at 5, as always, beginning the familiar routine that had defined his adult life. Feed the cattle, check the fences, repair what broke overnight, and pray that nothing major went wrong. He was in the middle of fixing a broken water pump in the north pasture when he heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, he was surprised to see Elena dressed in practical work boots, jeans that had clearly seen actual use, and a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "You always start this early?" she asked, carrying 2 travel mugs of coffee. "Ranches don't run themselves," Jake replied, turning back to the pump. "Thought you'd be sleeping in." "I grew up spending summers on my grandfather's farm in Iowa," Elena said, handing him one of the mugs. 5 a.m. doesn't scare me. Jake accepted the coffee grudgingly, taking a sip and finding it exactly how he liked it, black and strong. "Your aunt tell you that too?" "Your mother did." "She's very thorough." Elena crouched next to the pump, examining the problem. "Looks like you've got a cracked seal. This pump must be 20 years old." 23, Jake confirmed. "Can't afford to replace it yet." Elena pulled out her phone, making notes. "How many pumps do you have on the property?" 8, 6 are working. This one's been giving me trouble for months. And backup water sources? Creek runs through the eastern section, but it's been low the last 2 summers. Wells are deep enough for the house and barn, but not sufficient for the whole herd. Jake wiped his hands on his jeans, frustration evident. "I know it's a problem. Don't need you to tell me that. I'm not here to judge your problems, Jake. I'm here to solve them." Elena stood, her gaze sweeping across the property. "Can you show me the full layout? I want to see every inch of the operation. For the next 6 hours." Jake found himself giving an exhaustive tour of the Broken Arrow Ranch. They walked the fence lines, inspected the cattle, examined the barn and equipment, and reviewed the irrigation system. Elena asked hundreds of questions, her phone constantly out as she photographed, measured, and documented everything. What surprised Jake most was her knowledge. This wasn't some city woman pretending to understand ranch life. Elena knew cattle breeds, grazing patterns, and water rights law. She could identify problems with equipment at a glance and ask technical questions that revealed a deep understanding of agricultural operations. By noon, they'd covered the eastern half of the property. Jake led them back to the ranch house for lunch, pulling together sandwiches from what little he had in the refrigerator. "You're running about 30% below optimal capacity," Elena said between bites, reviewing notes on her tablet. "Your herd is too small for the amount of land you have, which means you're not maximizing revenue per acre. Can't afford to buy more cattle," Jake pointed out. "And breeding takes time. Have you considered leasing grazing rights to neighboring ranches? Your land is underutilized. You could generate income while your own herd grows." Elena pulled up a map on her tablet. "There's also this section here, the southeastern corner. According to county records, there's a conservation easement possibility that could provide immediate capital." Jake frowned. "I'm not selling off pieces of my ranch." "Not selling, protecting." Elena turned the tablet toward him. "Conservation easements pay you to keep land undeveloped. You maintain ownership and can still use it for ranching, but you get compensated for preserving it. It's perfect for that section. It's mostly wooded anyway, and you said to yourself you don't graze there." It was an interesting idea, one Jake had never considered. "How much capital?" "Based on comparable easements in Montana, probably 50 to 75,000. Enough to replace your failing equipment and buy breeding stock." Elena met his gaze. "But that's just one piece of the puzzle. Your real problem isn't land or equipment, it's cash flow. You're asset-rich and cash-poor, which is fixable." Jake leaned back in his chair, processing this flood of information. In 6 hours, Elena had identified more solutions than he'd found in 6 months of struggling alone. It was both encouraging and humiliating. "You mentioned water rights earlier," Jake said. "What were you thinking?" Elena's eyes lit up. Clearly, she'd been waiting for him to ask. "Montana water law is complicated, but from what I've seen, you might have senior water rights on that creek. If that's true, you could potentially sell or lease those rights to other properties in the area who need additional allocation. The revenue could be substantial, and leave my own cattle without water. Not if we restructure your irrigation system and consolidate your wells. The creek isn't reliable anyway, you said it yourself. Better to modernize your water infrastructure and monetize what you're not efficiently using." Elena pulled up more documents. "I'll need to verify the water rights situation, but if I'm correct, this alone could generate 20 to 30,000 annually." Jake's head was spinning. These weren't miracle solutions. They were practical, strategic moves that required work and planning, but were actually achievable. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of inevitable failure felt slightly lighter. "Why are you really here?" Jake asked suddenly. "The truth." "Not the business pitch." Elena set down her tablet, considering the question carefully. "My aunt married my uncle in an arranged marriage 40 years ago. It wasn't common even then, but their families were traditional. Everyone expected it to fail. 2 strangers forced together. But they built something real. They saved each other in ways that had nothing to do with obligation." "So you believe in arranged marriages?" "I believe that sometimes the people we need most arrive in unexpected ways," Elena said carefully. "Do I think you need to marry a stranger to save your ranch? No, but do I think you need help, and that maybe being open to unconventional solutions might save you?" "Yes," Jake appreciated her honesty. "Your aunt must be disappointed. My aunt wants me to be happy. Helping ranchers keep their land makes me happy." Elena smiled slightly. "If a romance develops, she'll take credit. If it doesn't, at least a ranch got saved. She wins either way." They spent the afternoon examining the southern sections of the property. Elena was particularly interested in an old barn structure that Jake had been meaning to tear down for years. "Don't!" Elena said firmly, walking through the dusty interior. "This is the original construction, isn't it?" "Or built by my great-grandfather in 1932, Jake confirmed. "But it's not useful anymore. Too small for modern equipment. It's perfect for agritourism." Elena spun around, her excitement palpable. "Montana Ranch Experience Packages. City people pay thousands for authentic ranch stays. You've got the space, the setting, and a story. This barn could be converted into guest quarters. You run weekend programs, cattle drives, horseback riding, ranch cooking. Additional revenue stream that uses your existing resources. Jake shook his head. I'm not running a dude ranch. Why not? Pride, Elena challenged. Because that pride is going to cost you everything. Because this is a working ranch, not a tourist attraction. It can be both. Elena pulled up examples on her phone, showing successful ranch tourism operations across Montana. Look at these numbers. 3 weekends a month, 10 guests per weekend, 1,500 per person. That's 45,000 per month during peak season. The math was staggering. Jake wanted to dismiss it, but he couldn't deny the logic. The infrastructure was already here. He knew ranching inside and out. And heaven knows he could use 45,000 a month. That's a lot of strangers on my property, Jake said quietly. It's a lot of revenue keeping your property yours, Elena countered gently. As the sun began setting on their first full day together, Jake found himself genuinely considering ideas he would have rejected outright that morning. Elena had a gift for seeing potential where he only saw problems. More than that, she understood the emotional weight of potentially losing generational land. She wasn't just crunching numbers, she was fighting for something that mattered. They walked back to the ranch house in comfortable silence, Scout trailing behind. The Montana sky blazed with color, the kind of sunset that Jake knew he'd never see from a city apartment or anywhere else in the world. This land is worth fighting for, Eleanor said softly, as if reading his thoughts. Whatever it takes. Jake glanced at her, this unexpected woman who'd crashed into his life with balance sheets and conservation easements. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. Same time tomorrow? He asked. Elena smiled. 5 a.m. I'll bring the coffee. As she walked back toward the guest cottage, Jake stood on his porch, looking out over the ranch that had defined his entire existence. For the first time in months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope, and maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. The second day began differently. Jake woke to find Elena already working in the old barn, her laptop balanced on a makeshift table made from sawhorses and plywood. The morning light streamed through the gaps in the wooden slats, illuminating dust motes that danced around her focused figure. You're early, Jake said, carrying 2 mugs of coffee he'd made himself this time. Elena looked up, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Couldn't sleep. Had an idea about the water rights situation? She accepted the coffee gratefully. I called the county recorder's office before they opened, left a message. Your family's water claim dates back to 1891, which means you likely have priority over every other ranch in a 15-mile radius. Jake sat down on an old hay bale, impressed despite himself. And that matters because? Because the Hendersons, your neighbors to the south, expanded their operation 5 years ago. I saw their new cattle pens from the road yesterday. They're drawing from the same watershed, but their rights are probably junior to yours. Elena pulled up a document on her screen. If they're pulling more than their allocation, you could have legal grounds to demand compensation or force them to reduce usage. The Hendersons. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Richard Henderson had been circling the Broken Arrow like a vulture for 2 years, making lowball offers every time Jake hit a rough patch. The man's ranch had tripled in size by buying out struggling neighbors. Henderson's been trying to buy me out, Jake admitted. Offered me 30 cents on the dollar last month. Elena's eyes sharpened. Did he mention water rights? Not specifically. Just said the land would be better utilized under his management. Jake took a long drink of coffee. Why? Because if he knows your water rights are senior to his, and he's overdrawing from the watershed, your property becomes much more valuable to him. Not because of the land itself, but because you could legally shut down a significant portion of his operation. Elena stood, pacing the barn floor. This changes everything. We're not just saving your ranch. We're potentially sitting on leverage worth hundreds of thousands. Jake's mind raced. He'd spent so long thinking of himself as the desperate one that he'd never considered he might have power in the situation. How do we prove he's overdrawing? We hire a water engineer to conduct a usage study. It'll cost about $3,000, but if I'm right, Henderson will settle out of court rather than risk a judgment against him." Eleanor's smile was almost fierce. "And that settlement money? That's your equipment fund, your breeding stock, and your first year of operations secured. For the next hour, they mapped out a strategy that was part legal maneuvering, part business restructuring, and part calculated risk. Elena explained each step with clarity, never talking down to him, but never assuming knowledge he didn't have. Around 9, a dusty pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Jake recognized it immediately. Tom Bradshaw, his oldest friend, and the local veterinarian who'd been treating the Broken Arrow's livestock for years. "Jake," Tom called out, climbing from his truck with his medical bag. "Got your message about the heifer?" "Where is she?" "North pasture," Jake replied, walking over. "She's been limping since yesterday." Tom's gaze shifted to Eleanor, curiosity evident on his weathered face. "And who's this?" "Elena Reeves. She's helping me with some business planning." Jake kept his tone neutral, not wanting to invite questions he couldn't answer yet. "Business planning, huh?" Tom's eyebrows rose. "Well, it's about time you got some help around here, Sullivan. This place has been running you ragged." They walked together to the north pasture, where a young heifer stood favoring her left rear leg. Tom worked quickly, his experienced hands checking for injury, while Elena watched from a respectful distance, taking notes on her phone. "Looks like she stepped in a gopher hole," Tom announced after his examination. "Nothing broken, but she'll need to stay off it for a week. Keep her separated from the herd." "Another expense," Jake muttered. "Add it to my tab," Tom said, then lowered his voice. "Jake, I heard some talk in town yesterday. Henderson's been asking around about your water situation. Thought you should know." Jake's eyes met Elena's across the pasture. She'd been right. After Tom left with promises to check back in 3 days, Eleanor and Jake spent the afternoon documenting every water source on the property. They measured well depths, photographed irrigation systems, and tracked the creek's flow at multiple points. The work was tedious but necessary. "You know what you're doing," Jake observed as Eleanor waded into the creek, measuring water depth and flow rate with professional equipment she'd apparently brought with her. "My master's thesis was on water rights conflicts in agricultural regions," Elena replied, not looking up from her measurements. "I've always been fascinated by how something as simple as water can make or break entire communities. Why do you do this? Help ranchers?" Elena paused, sitting back on her heels in the shallow water. "My grandfather lost his farm when I was 12. Bank foreclosed right before harvest. He died 6 months later. Doctors said it was a heart attack, but my grandmother said he died of a broken heart." She returned to her measurements, her voice steady but carrying old pain. "I became a financial analyst so I could understand exactly how it happened and maybe prevent it from happening to others." Jake felt something shift in his chest. Elena wasn't just another consultant chasing a fee. This was personal for her, a mission born from loss and grief. They were more alike than he'd realized. "I'm sorry about your grandfather," Jake said quietly. "Don't be sorry. Just let me help you keep this place." Elena stood, water dripping from her boots. "That's the best tribute I can give him." They worked until sunset, and for the first time, Jake found himself talking about things he normally kept locked away. He told her about his father's death 10 years ago, about the slow decline that followed, about the guilt of not being able to save what previous generations had built. Elena listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just being present. When they finally called it a day, Jake realized he felt lighter, not because his problems were solved, but because he was no longer carrying them alone. The third day brought unexpected complications. Jake was in the barn before dawn, preparing for the day's work, when his phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Patricia Vance from First Montana Bank. I'm calling to inform you that we've received a complaint regarding your property's water usage. We'll need to schedule an inspection before we can proceed with any loan modifications." Jake's blood ran cold. "What complaint? From who?" I'm not at liberty to say, but the inspection is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please ensure access to all water sources on your property." After hanging up, Jake stormed toward the guest cottage, where Elena was already awake and working on her laptop. "Henderson made a move," Jake announced without preamble. "Bank's doing a water inspection tomorrow. He must have filed a complaint." Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Smart and ruthless. He's trying to create grounds for the bank to accelerate foreclosure by claiming environmental violations." She grabbed her phone, but he made a mistake. By forcing an official inspection, he's opening up his own operation to scrutiny. How does that help me? "Because I'm going to call the State Water Resources Department and request a comprehensive watershed review. If they're inspecting your property, they'll have to inspect his too. And we already know he's likely overdrawing." Eleanor was already dialing. Henderson just turned this into a battle he might not win. The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation. Elena contacted the water engineer she'd mentioned earlier and paid for an emergency assessment out of her own pocket. They documented every drop of water on the property, cross-referenced historical records from the county, and built a case that Jake's operation was not only compliant, but arguably underutilizing his legal allocation. That evening, exhausted and covered in dust, they sat on the ranch house porch, watching the stars emerge. The Milky Way stretched across the Montana sky, so bright and clear it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. "I can't pay you back if this doesn't work," Jake said quietly. "The engineer the legal fees, if we lose." "You're out thousands." "Then we won't lose," Elena replied simply. "You sound pretty confident for someone who's seen how bad things are." Elena turned to look at him, her face half-shadowed in the porch light. "Jake, in the 3 days I've been here, I've seen a man who gets up before dawn and works until he can barely stand. I've seen cattle that are healthy despite outdated equipment, pastures that are carefully rotated despite being short-handed, and a property that's been maintained with obvious love despite crushing debt. You haven't failed this ranch. Circumstances have been failing you. There's a difference." Jake felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. He'd spent so long blaming himself that hearing someone acknowledge the impossible situation he'd been fighting through hit harder than he'd expected. "My ex-wife left 3 years ago," Jake said suddenly, surprising himself. "Said she couldn't watch me kill myself trying to save something that was already dead." Maybe she was right. "Was she here in the trenches with you, helping find solutions?" Elena asked. "She wanted me to sell. Said we could start over somewhere else, do something easier." "Then she didn't understand what this place means," Elena said firmly. "And she definitely didn't understand you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night surrounding them. Crickets, the occasional call of a nightbird, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. "Why aren't you married?" Jake asked, then immediately wished he could take it back. "Sorry, that's none of my business." Elena laughed. "It's fine. The answer is boring. I'm married to my work. Traveling between failing ranches doesn't leave much room for a personal life." "Sounds lonely," says the man who lives alone on thousands of acres. Elena countered with a smile. "That's different. I've got Scout. Well, I have my aunt's relentless matchmaking attempts." Equally comforting, they both laughed, and Jake realized how good it felt. When was the last time he'd laughed about anything? The bank inspection the next day was tense but thorough. The inspector, a stern woman named Margaret Crawford, spent 4 hours examining every aspect of Jake's water usage. Elena shadowed her throughout, politely pointing out documentation that supported Jake's compliance, and occasionally asking pointed questions about inspection protocols. When Margaret finally packed up her equipment, she seemed almost disappointed. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Sullivan. In fact, you're using significantly less water than your rights allow. I'll have my report filed within 48 hours. And the complaint?" Jake asked. Margaret's expression suggested she'd realized the complaint was bogus. Without evidence of violations, complaints are dismissed. However, since this triggered a watershed review, All properties drawing from this water source will be inspected. Standard procedure. After she left, Jake let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. Elena was grinning. Henderson's inspection is scheduled for next week, she said, checking her phone. And I've already sent our water engineer's preliminary findings to the state. They're very interested in the usage patterns he documented. You really think this will work? I think Henderson made a strategic error by trying to force your hand before securing his own position, Elena replied. And I think by next week he's going to be very motivated to negotiate. That afternoon brought another surprise. Jake's mother arrived unannounced. Her small sedan packed with supplies and a determination that Jake recognized immediately. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Carol Sullivan emerged from her car, a petite woman in her early 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I came to meet the young woman who's been helping my stubborn son." She turned to Elena with a warm smile. "You must be Elena. I've heard wonderful things from your aunt." Elena shook her hand, seeming genuinely pleased. "Mrs. Sullivan, it's nice to finally meet you. Carol, please. Now show me what you've been working on. I want to understand everything for the next 2 hours." Elena walked Carol through the entire plan: the conservation easement, the water rights situation, the agritourism concept, and the various revenue streams they were developing. Carol listened intently, asking sharp questions that revealed she understood ranch economics far better than Jake had given her credit for. "This is good work," Carol finally said, looking at Elena with approval. "Really good. Jake, I hope you're appreciating what she's doing here." "I am, Ma," Jake replied, feeling oddly defensive. Carol turned her sharp gaze on him. "Are you? Because from what I'm hearing, Elena's been putting in 18-hour days, spending her own money, and fighting battles you didn't even know you had. The least you could do is say thank you properly." After his mother left, with promises to return the following week, Jake found Elena back in the old barn, now transformed into a makeshift office with power run from the house and a whiteboard covered in plans and timelines. "My mother likes you," Jake said from the doorway. Elena looked up, smiling. "Your mother is formidable. I see where you get your stubbornness. She's right, though. I haven't properly thanked you." Jake stepped inside, suddenly feeling awkward. "You've done more in 4 days than I've accomplished in 4 months. And I've been not exactly welcoming." "You've been scared," Elena said gently. "And defensive. I get it. This is your family's legacy, and here comes a stranger telling you how to save it." "That can't be easy." "It's not," Jake admitted. "But you've earned my trust. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that." Elena's expression softened. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Jake couldn't quite name. Elena was the first to look away, returning to her laptop, and Jake retreated before he said something he might regret. That night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Jake had to face an uncomfortable truth. He was starting to care about Elena Reeves, not just as someone helping save his ranch, but as a person, smart, driven, compassionate, and beautiful in a way that snuck up on him when he wasn't paying attention. It was the worst possible timing. His life was a disaster, his future uncertain, and the last thing he needed was to develop feelings for a woman who would leave as soon as her job was done. Elena had made it clear she was here professionally, nothing more. Jake rolled over, punching his pillow into a different shape. 3 more days until the Henderson inspection. 3 more days until they'd know if their strategy would work. And probably not much longer until Elena packed up her sedan and moved on to the next failing ranch, leaving Jake to implement plans that would always remind him of her. Scout whined from his bed in the corner, sensing his master's unease. Jake reached down to scratch the dog's ears, taking comfort in the simple affection. "We're in trouble, boy," Jake whispered. "And I'm not just talking about the ranch, but Scout, wise in the way that dogs are, just thumped his tail and went back to sleep. A content that whatever troubles tomorrow brought, they'd face them together. The sun would rise in a few hours, bringing with it the 5th day of Elena's assessment and whatever complications it held. Jake closed his eyes, trying not to count down the days until she'd be gone, and finally drifted into uneasy sleep, where he dreamed of water rights and green eyes and a future that felt just barely possible. The fifth day started with unexpected news. Elena's phone rang during breakfast, and Jake watched her expression shift from curiosity to shock to something that looked almost like triumph. "When?" she asked into the phone. "And they're certain?" A pause. "Thank you. Send me everything." She hung up and turned to Jake, eyes bright. "The state water inspector found Henderson's operation is drawing 40% above his legal allocation. They're issuing a cease and desist order until he reduces usage to compliant levels." Jake set down his coffee mug carefully. "What does that mean for him?" "It means he has to reduce his herd by at least a third, maybe more. It means thousands in fines. And it means," Elena pulled up a document on her tablet, "that he's going to want to settle with you privately before this becomes public record and his other neighbors start asking questions about their water access." "How much are we talking?" Elena's fingers danced across the screen, running calculations. "Conservative estimate? 200,000 for a permanent easement agreement where he pays you annually for water access. Aggressive estimate? 400,000 for a one-time settlement where you transfer a portion of your senior rights to him." Jake's head spun. Those numbers represented more than salvation. They represented stability, growth, the ability to not just survive but actually thrive. "You're sure?" "Henderson will lawyer up and try to negotiate down, but yes, I'm sure. His operation is worth millions, and without adequate water rights, it's worthless." "You'll pay?" Elena stood, pacing with the energy of someone who just won a major battle. "The question is, what do you want? Annual payments give you steady income, but keep you tied to him. A lump sum gives you freedom, but requires smart investment." Before Jake could answer, his phone buzzed. The number made his stomach clench. "Richard Henderson." "Don't answer," Eleanor said quickly. "Not yet. Let him sweat for 24 hours. He's expecting you to be desperate and grateful. Instead, we make him wait and realize you hold all the cards." Jake silenced the call, admiring Elena's strategic mind. "You've done this before. Different situation, same principle. Never negotiate from anxiety." Elena's phone buzzed, a text from her aunt. She read it and smiled. "And Chen wants to know if we've fallen in love yet." The comment hung in the air between them, suddenly making the kitchen feel smaller. Jake cleared his throat. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm here to save a ranch, not play matchmaker." Eleanor's tone was light, but she wasn't quite meeting his eyes. "Though she'll interpret any delay in my response as confirmation of her romantic theories." "Is that so terrible?" Jake asked before he could stop himself. Elena finally looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Jake, forget it," Jake said quickly, standing to clear the dishes. "We should focus on Henderson. Strategy first." But the moment lingered, unresolved and electric, as they moved through their morning routine with careful politeness that felt more awkward than their initial hostility had. The real complication arrived that afternoon in the form of a sleek Mercedes SUV pulling into the ranch. A man in his early 60s emerged, wearing expensive boots that had never seen real mud and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jake Sullivan," Richard Henderson called out, approaching with false friendliness. "Thought I'd stop by personally instead of playing phone tag." Jake stepped off the porch, positioning himself between Henderson and the house, and Elena, who'd emerged to stand in the doorway. "Henderson, didn't expect a visit? Well, seems we've got some mutual concerns about water management in the area." Henderson's gaze slid past Jake to Eleanor, curiosity evident. "And you are?" "Elena Reeves, Mr. Sullivan's consultant." Elena's voice was professional and cool. Henderson's smile tightened. "Consultant, interesting. Jake, I was hoping we could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding the recent water inspection situation." "On whose terms?" Jake asked bluntly. "Now, no need to be hostile. We're neighbors, and neighbors help each other out." Henderson pulled a folder from his SUV. "I've had my lawyers draw up a proposal." You grant me access to your senior water rights, and I'll pay you $25,000 annually. That's money you could certainly use, given your situation. Jake took the folder but didn't open it. 25,000. Generous? Considering the alternative is both of us fighting legal battles that benefit no one but the lawyers. Henderson's tone suggested he thought he was being reasonable. Elena stepped forward. Mr. Henderson, are you aware that Jake's senior rights, established in 1891, give him legal authority to curtail your operation entirely? The state inspection revealed you're drawing 40% over your allocation, a violation that puts your entire ranch at risk. Henderson's friendly mask slipped. Miss Reeves, this is a private matter between neighbors. Then perhaps we should keep it private, Elena continued smoothly, which means negotiating a fair settlement that reflects the actual value of what you're requesting. 25,000 annually doesn't even cover the legal fees Jake could recover in court, much less the value of the water access itself. What number did you have in mind? Henderson asked, his voice hardening. 350,000 for a permanent easement, Elena said without hesitation, with annual adjustments based on the agricultural water index. Or Jake exercises his legal right to reduce your operation to compliant levels, which we both know will cost you significantly more. Henderson's jaw clenched. That's extortion. That's fair market value for senior water rights in Montana, Elena corrected. I can provide you with comparable settlements if you'd like documentation. The tension crackled between them until Henderson turned back to Jake. You're really going to let some consultant speak for you? Jake met his eyes steadily. She's speaking for both of us. And she's right. You tried to force my hand with that bank complaint, Henderson. Now you're dealing with the consequences. Henderson's facade cracked completely. You're making a mistake, Sullivan. I've been in this valley for 30 years. I have friends at the bank, on the county commission, everywhere that matters. You really want to go to war with me? If necessary, Jake said quietly. But I'd rather we both walk away with something. Your choice. Henderson stormed back to his Mercedes, throwing a final glare at Eleanor. You'll hear from my lawyers. After he left, Jake released a breath he'd been holding. That could have gone better. Actually, it went perfectly, Elena said, already typing on her phone. He showed his hand, the threat about his connections. That's desperation. He'll negotiate seriously now, or he'll make good on those threats. Elena looked up, her expression fierce. Let him try. We've documented everything, and the state is already involved. Any move he makes now just builds our case, she smiled. You stood your ground. That was impressive. Jake felt warmth spread through his chest at her approval. Learned from the best. That evening, Tom Bradshaw returned to check on the injured heifer and brought unexpected news with him. Heard Henderson paid a visit, Tom said, as they walked to the north pasture. Word travels fast in small towns. How'd you hear about it? Jake asked. His ranch manager was at the feed store, complaining about water restrictions. Said Henderson's furious about some consultant stirring up trouble. Tom glanced at Jake. That'd be your Elena, I'm guessing. She's not my Elena, Jake protested. Tom laughed. Sure she's not. Jake, I've known you since we were kids. I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her. It's complicated. Best things usually are. Tom examined the heifer, pleased with her progress. For what it's worth, everyone in town's rooting for you. Henderson's been buying up properties and pushing people out for years. About time someone stood up to him. After Tom left, Jake found Elena in the barn office, surrounded by paperwork and empty coffee cups. She looked exhausted but energized, like someone running on pure adrenaline. You need to sleep, Jake said from the doorway. I will. Just want to finish these conservation easement applications. If we can get approval within 2 weeks, you'll have capital to negotiate from a position of strength. Eleanor rubbed her eyes. The Henderson settlement might take months to finalize through lawyers. Jake entered the barn, pulled up a chair next to her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you do this to yourself? 18-hour days, fighting other people's battles, moving from one desperate situation to another. Jake's voice was gentle. Tom said you've been working with ranchers across 3 states. That's no life. Elena was quiet for a long moment. My grandfather used to say that land has memory, that every generation leaves an imprint on the places they love. When he lost his farm, it felt like his imprint was erased, like his whole life's work just vanished. She met Jake's eyes. I do this because every ranch I help save is proof that those imprints can last, that the people who love the land can actually keep it. That's a heavy burden to carry alone. Who says I'm alone? Elena gestured at the barn around them. Right now, I'm sitting in a barn built by your great-grandfather, helping the great-great-grandson keep a promise made generations ago. I'm connected to something bigger than myself. That's the opposite of alone. Jake understood then that Elena wasn't just saving ranches. She was saving herself from the grief of her grandfather's loss over and over again. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. For the record, Jake said carefully, you're not alone in this fight. Whatever happens with Henderson, with the bank, with any of it, we're in it together. Elena's hand found his on the table, her fingers warm and sure. Thank you. That means everything. They sat like that for a while, hands linked in the quiet barn, neither willing to break the moment. Outside, the Montana night settled over the Broken Arrow Ranch, stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. The next morning brought official documentation from the state. Henderson's ranch was under formal review, and Jake's operation was cleared of all complaints. More importantly, the state had placed a temporary moratorium on all new water allocations in the watershed, pending a comprehensive usage study. This is huge, Eleanor explained over breakfast. It means Henderson can't find alternative water sources without your cooperation. Every ranch in the area just became aware that water rights matter. And yours are the most senior. Jake's phone had been ringing all morning, neighboring ranchers asking questions, offering congratulations, some subtly inquiring about his plans. The power dynamic in the valley had shifted overnight. By noon, Henderson's lawyer called requesting a formal negotiation meeting. Elena scheduled it for 3 days out, enough time to prepare but soon enough to maintain pressure. 3 days, Jake said after she hung up. That's almost how long you've been here. Elena checked her calendar. 7 days total tomorrow. Feels longer. Good longer or bad longer? She smiled. Good longer. Definitely good. The week mark brought Jake's mother back to the ranch, this time with his aunt and uncle in tow. Family he hadn't seen in months, gathering to witness what Carol described as the Sullivan comeback. They marveled at Elena's plans, asked endless questions, and treated her like she'd already saved the ranch rather than just positioned it for salvation. Over a dinner of his aunt's famous pot roast, Jake watched Elena interact with his family, laughing at his uncle's bad jokes, listening intently to his aunt's stories about the ranch's history, discussing plant species with his mother, who'd been a botany teacher. She fit. In a way his ex-wife never had. Elena understood and appreciated what this place meant. She didn't see it as a burden or an obstacle. She saw it as what it was, a legacy worth fighting for. After dinner, Carol pulled Jake aside on the porch. She's special, that one. I know, Ma. You going to do something about it or let her walk away when this is done? Jake watched through the window as Elena helped clear dishes, animated in conversation with his aunt. She's got a life, Ma. A career that takes her all over. I can't ask her to give that up for a struggling ranch and a stubborn cowboy. Have you asked what she wants? Carol challenged. Because from where I'm standing, she looks pretty happy right here. Jake didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, he was terrified to ask. Terrified she'd say no, and terrified she'd say yes. Both options felt equally overwhelming. That night, after his family left and the ranch settled into quiet, Jake found Elena on the guest cottage porch, wrapped in a blanket and staring at the stars. Mind some company? He asked. Elena shifted over, making room. Henderson's lawyer called again tonight. Wants to move the meeting up? Offered preliminary terms of $275,000. That's more than Henderson offered originally. It's less than you deserve. But it's a starting point. Elena pulled the blanket tighter. Jake, I need to tell you something. His heart stuttered. Okay, I'm supposed to leave in 3 days. I have another client waiting in Wyoming, a sheep ranch facing similar issues. Elena's voice was careful. But I've been thinking, maybe I could extend my stay here. Help you through the Henderson negotiation, get the conservation easement finalized, launch the agritourism program. How long? A month, maybe 2. If that's something you'd want. Elena finally turned to look at him. If I wouldn't be in the way. Jake felt hope and fear war in his chest. 2 more months meant 2 more months of her presence, her ideas, her laugh. It also meant 2 more months of falling harder for someone who would eventually leave. But looking at her face in the starlight, Jake realized he'd take whatever time he could get. Stay, he said simply. As long as you want. The ranch needs you and... He took a breath. I need you too. Elena's smile was brilliant even in the darkness. Then I'll stay. They sat together watching stars wheel overhead, hands finding each other under the blanket, neither quite ready to name what was growing between them, but both willing to give it time to develop. The Henderson negotiation was 3 days away. The ranch's future hung in the balance, but for the first time in years, Jake Sullivan felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was beginning to hope for something more. The morning of the Henderson negotiation arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind that turned dirt roads to mud and made the ranch feel isolated from the rest of the world. Jake stood at his bedroom window watching water stream down the glass, trying to calm the anxiety churning in his gut. Everything hinged on today. Not just the financial settlement, but the entire future of the Broken Arrow Ranch. He'd showered, put on the one good suit he owned, the same one he'd worn to his father's funeral, and now stood frozen, unable to make himself walk out the door. A knock interrupted his spiral. Jake, you ready? Elena's voice carried through the wood. He opened the door to find her in professional attire he'd never seen before. A charcoal blazer and slacks that made her look like she belonged in a corporate boardroom. Not a Montana ranch. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and she carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than his truck payment. You look terrified, she observed. I am terrified, Jake admitted. What if we're wrong? What if Henderson walks away and uses his connections to destroy us anyway? Elena stepped into his room, setting down her portfolio. Then we fight. But Jake, we're not wrong. I've run every scenario, consulted with 3 different attorneys, and had 2 independent water engineers verify our position. Henderson needs what you have more than you need what he's offering. Remember that. You make it sound simple. It is simple. The execution is what's hard. Elena straightened his tie, her fingers gentle against his collar. But you're not doing this alone. I'll be right beside you the entire time. The touch of her hands steadied him more than any pep talk could. Jake covered her fingers with his own. What happens after today? After today, you have the capital to save your ranch, Elena said. Isn't that what matters? It is, Jake agreed. But it's not the only thing that matters anymore. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Elena's eyes searched his face, and Jake wondered if she could see how completely she'd become woven into his thoughts. His plans, his vision of the future. We should go, Elena said finally, stepping back. Henderson's lawyer wants to meet at the county offices at 10. The drive into town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time they reached the county administrative building, a squat brick structure that housed everything from marriage licenses to property records. Henderson was already there, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits that made Jake feel like a country bumpkin. But Elena matched them in presence and polish, greeting them with cool professionalism that commanded respect. Gentlemen, she said, shaking hands with each lawyer. Shall we get started? They gathered in a conference room that smelled of old coffee and bureaucracy. Henderson sat at the head of the table like he owned the place, his lawyers arranging documents with practiced efficiency. Let's cut to the chase, Henderson's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Marcus Winters, began. My client is prepared to offer $275,000 for a permanent easement, granting access to Sullivan's senior water rights. Elena didn't even open her portfolio. That's 40% below fair market value for senior rights established in 1891. It's also well below what Mr. Henderson stands to lose if this goes to litigation. Miss Reeves. Let's be realistic, Winters replied. Your client is facing foreclosure. He needs cash immediately, not a protracted legal battle, which is exactly why we're here negotiating instead of letting the state complete its investigation into your client's water violations, Eleanor countered smoothly. The cease and desist order is temporary. Once the full investigation concludes, those violations could trigger fines exceeding $500,000. Plus mandatory herd reduction that would cost millions in lost revenue. Henderson's face reddened. This is extortion. This is negotiation, Elena corrected. You made a strategic decision to file a false complaint with the bank, hoping to pressure my client into a desperate sale. That backfired spectacularly when the state discovered your operation's actual violations. Now you're here because you need resolution before your other. Neighbors start asking uncomfortable questions about their own water access. Jake watched in admiration as Elena dismantled Henderson's position piece by piece. She wasn't aggressive or emotional, just relentlessly logical, presenting facts that couldn't be argued with. $325,000, Winters said, after conferring with Henderson. Final offer. Elena finally opened her portfolio, sliding a document across the table. $375,000, with annual adjustments tied to the Agricultural Water Index, paid in 3 installments over 18 months. Additionally, Mr. Henderson agrees to a good neighbor clause, no future attempts to purchase, pressure, or otherwise interfere with the Broken Arrow Ranch operations. That's excessive, Henderson protested. That's protection, Elena replied. You've already demonstrated you're willing to use underhanded tactics. This ensures it doesn't happen again. The room fell silent, except for the rain pattering against the windows. Henderson and his lawyers huddled in whispered conversation while Jake tried to breathe normally. $375,000 would change everything, pay off the immediate bank debt, fund equipment upgrades, and provide operating capital for at least 2 years. $350,000. Winters said finally. But only 2 installments and we remove the good neighbor clause. Elena looked at Jake, raising an eyebrow in silent question. This was his decision to make. Jake thought about his grandfather, who'd built this ranch with nothing but determination and sweat. He thought about his father, who'd expanded it during impossible times. And he thought about Elena, who'd shown him that asking for help wasn't weakness but strategy. $350,000, 3 installments, keep the good neighbor clause, Jake said, his voice steady. Those are our terms. Henderson's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Fine, but I want it in writing that Sullivan won't interfere with my operation beyond the agreed-upon water allocation. Done, Eleanor said, already typing on her laptop. I'll have the formal agreement drafted by end of business today. First installment of $117,000 due upon signing. Remaining installments at 6 and 12 months. Within an hour, they'd hammered out the remaining details. Henderson signed preliminary agreements with obvious reluctance, his lawyers already planning the formal contracts. As they filed out of the conference room, Henderson paused beside Jake. You got lucky, Sullivan, he said quietly. That consultant of yours is ruthless. She's protecting what matters, Jake replied. Maybe you should try it sometime instead of taking from your neighbors. Henderson's expression flickered with something that might have been respect before he turned and left. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. Jake and Elena walked to the truck in silence, both processing what had just happened. It wasn't until they were driving back toward the ranch that Jake finally spoke. We did it. You did it, Elena corrected. I just helped you see what was already there. Jake pulled the truck over on a scenic overlook, the valley spreading out below them in shades of green and gold. Elena, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. She turned in her seat, giving him her full attention. "When you showed up at my ranch 9 days ago, I wanted you gone," Jake began. "I was angry, desperate, and too proud to admit I needed help. You forced your way into my life with spreadsheets and water rights law, and somewhere along the way," he took a breath, "you became the most important part of saving this ranch. But more than that, you became important to me. Not as a consultant or a strategist, but as a person I can't imagine not having in my life." Elena's eyes had gone wide, her professional composure cracking to show vulnerability beneath. "I know you have other clients waiting," Jake continued. "I know your work takes you all over. I'm not asking you to give that up. But I need you to know that if you want to stay, not just for the ranch, but for me, there's a place for you here. For as long as you want it." The silence that followed felt eternal. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, terrified he'd misread everything, that he'd pushed too far too fast. Then Eleanor laughed, not mockingly, but with something like relief. "Jake Sullivan, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you that I don't want to leave. That somewhere between water rights negotiations and fence line inspections, I fell for this stubborn cowboy who works himself to exhaustion, trying to honor his family's legacy." Jake felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. "You, what?" "I'm saying that yes, I have clients waiting. Yes, my work usually takes me all over. But maybe—" Elena reached across the truck's console, taking his hand. "Maybe it's time I found a home base. Somewhere I want to come back to. Someone I want to come back to." Jake pulled her across the seat, kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the past week, relief and joy, and a hunger that had been building since the moment she'd challenged him on his own porch. Elena kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his suit jacket like she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying," Elena confirmed. "At least until we get the agritourism program launched, the conservation easement finalized, and your operation stable. After that," she smiled, "we'll figure it out together." They sat there in the truck, wrapped in each other, watching clouds break apart to reveal blue sky. The valley below looked different now, not like a burden Jake was carrying alone, but like something beautiful worth protecting together. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "How'd it go?" Jake showed Elena, who laughed. "Your mother's going to be insufferable when she finds out we're together." "Together," Jake repeated, testing the word. "I like how that sounds." "Me too." Elena kissed him again, softer this time. "Now take me home, so we can tell your mother that her matchmaking aunt was right after all." The drive back to the Broken Arrow felt different, lighter somehow, despite the muddy roads and lingering clouds. Jake kept stealing glances at Elena, still half convinced he'd imagined the entire conversation. When they pulled up to the ranch house, Scout bounded out to greet them, tail wagging frantically. Elena crouched down to scratch his ears, and Jake was struck by how right she looked here, not like a visitor or consultant, but like someone who belonged. "I should call my aunt," Elena said, pulling out her phone. "She's going to take full credit for this." "Let her," Jake replied, pulling Elena close. "I don't care who takes credit as long as you're here." They stood in the ranch yard, arms around each other, as the Montana sky cleared and sunlight broke through the clouds. Scout circled them excitedly, sensing the shift in energy, the promise of something new beginning. Inside the ranch house, Jake's phone rang with calls from the bank, from his mother, from neighbors who'd somehow already heard about the Henderson settlement. But Jake ignored them all, focused entirely on the woman in his arms who'd shown up uninvited and ended up saving more than just his ranch. She'd saved him from the isolation he'd wrapped himself in, from the belief that he had to carry everything alone. Elena had proven that sometimes the help we need most comes in unexpected packages, and that letting someone in isn't a weakness, it's the bravest thing we can do. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, studying his face. "That I'm glad you didn't listen when I told you to leave," Jake admitted. Elena laughed. "You should know by now, I'm very stubborn when I believe in something. And you believe in this." "In us?" She pulled him down for another kiss. answering without words in a way that left no room for doubt. The Broken Arrow Ranch had been saved, but more importantly, Jake Sullivan had found something he'd stopped believing in, a future that included not just survival, but happiness. And it had all started with a woman he'd tried to send away, who'd refused to leave until she'd fixed not just his finances, but his broken heart. The weeks following the Henderson settlement transformed the Broken Arrow Ranch in ways Jake had never imagined possible. The first installment, $117,000, hit his account on a Tuesday morning, and Jake found himself staring at the balance like it might disappear if he blinked. "It's real," Elena said from beside him, watching over his shoulder as he checked his phone for the third time. "You can stop refreshing now." They were sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by invoices, equipment catalogs, and the kind of planning documents that represented hope rather than desperation. Scout dozed at their feet, content in the way dogs are when their people are happy. "First priority is the bank," Jake said, already pulling up the payment portal. "Get them off my back once and for all." "Smart." Elena made a note on her tablet. "That leaves you with about $60,000 for immediate operational needs. I recommend splitting it between equipment repair and cattle expansion. The breeding stock we discussed can wait until the second installment." Jake transferred $40,000 to First Montana Bank, watching years of crushing anxiety dissolve with a single click. The remaining debt was manageable now. No more foreclosure threats, no more sleepless nights wondering if the next day would be his last on Sullivan land. "How does it feel?" Elena asked softly, "Like I can breathe for the first time in 2 years. Jake reached for her hand across the scattered papers. "None of this happens without you. We make a good team." Elena squeezed his fingers. "Speaking of which, I got a call from the Conservation Easement Office. They want to schedule a site visit next week. If approved, that's another $70,000 within 60 days. The transformation wasn't just financial. Over the next month, the ranch itself began to change. New irrigation equipment arrived, gleaming and efficient compared to the ancient pumps Jake had been nursing along. He hired 2 ranch hands, young men from town who needed work, and suddenly the endless list of maintenance tasks became manageable. Elena threw herself into the agritourism project with characteristic intensity. She hired a contractor to renovate the old barn, transforming it from a dusty relic into rustic guest quarters that somehow managed to be both authentic and comfortable. She built a website, created social media accounts, and reached out to travel bloggers who specialized in Western experiences. "Look at this," she said one evening, showing Jake her laptop. "We've got 12 bookings already, and we haven't even officially launched." Jake studied the reservation calendar, still uncomfortable with the idea of strangers on his property, but unable to argue with the revenue projections. "What do they actually do here?" "I'm not running pony rides. Authentic ranch experience," Elena explained, scrolling through her detailed itinerary. "They help with morning feeding, learn about cattle management, ride the fence lines, participate in evening chores. We provide meals. I'm hiring Margaret from town to cook. She's already excited about it. And at night, they get campfire stories and stargazing. You've thought of everything. That's what you keep me around for." Elena closed her laptop, moving to stand behind his chair. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, and Jake leaned back into her embrace. "Well, that and my devastatingly charming personality," Jake laughed, pulling her around to sit on his lap. "The personality is a bonus." They'd fallen into an easy intimacy over the past weeks, the kind that developed when 2 people worked side by side toward a shared goal. Elena had moved from the guest cottage into the main house, her belongings slowly migrating until Jake couldn't imagine the space without her shoes by the door or her coffee mug in the sink. His mother had visited twice, each time barely containing her delight at finding them together. "I knew it," Carol had said during her last visit, hugging Elena with genuine affection. "From the moment your aunt described you, I knew you were perfect for my stubborn son." "Ma," Jake had protested, but Elena just laughed. Your mother's intuition is impressive, Elena had replied. She should consider matchmaking as a second career. The first agritourism weekend arrived with a mixture of excitement and dread. Jake stood on the porch watching an SUV pull up the drive, carrying what Elena's booking system described as the Anderson family from Seattle. "Relax," Elena said, appearing beside him in jeans and a flannel shirt that made her look perfectly at home. "They're here to experience real ranch life. Just be yourself. What if myself isn't what they're expecting? Then they'll get something better than their expectations." Elena squeezed his arm. "Trust me." The Andersons turned out to be a family of 4, parents in their 40s and 2 teenage kids who spent the first hour looking skeptical about the lack of Wi-Fi. But something changed when Jake took them out to the north pasture and let the sun help deliver feed to the cattle. The boys' eyes lit up when a calf approached, curious and unafraid. By evening, the skeptical teenagers were asking 100 questions about ranching. The father was helping Jake repair a fence section, and the mother was in the kitchen with Margaret learning to make biscuits from scratch. Around the campfire that night, Jake found himself telling stories about his grandfather, about the history written into every acre of the Broken Arrow. "This is amazing," Mrs. Anderson said, gazing at the stars that stretched endlessly above them. "Our kids spend so much time on screens, they forget there's a whole world out here." Jake glanced at Elena across the fire, catching her satisfied smile. She'd been right. People were hungry for this kind of authentic experience, this connection to something real and enduring. The Andersons left on Sunday afternoon with promises to return and reviews that glowed with enthusiasm. Within days, Elena's phone was ringing with new booking requests. "We're going to need more guest capacity," she said, reviewing inquiries. "I'm thinking we could convert the old foreman's cabin. It needs work, but the structure is sound." "More guests means more help," Jake pointed out. "I can't manage the regular ranch operation and entertainment simultaneously, so we hire specifically for the agritourism side. Someone to lead trail rides, help with activities, manage the guest experience." Elena was already making notes. "Let me look at the numbers, but I think we can afford it after the second Henderson installment." Progress came with challenges. Not everyone in town was thrilled about the changes at the Broken Arrow. Jake overheard criticism at the feed store, comments about selling out and turning a working ranch into a circus. It stung more than he wanted to admit. "They're jealous," Eleanor said bluntly when he mentioned it. "You're succeeding where others have failed. Some people can't handle that. I don't want enemies in town. These are my neighbors." Then prove them wrong. Show them that the agritourism revenue is funding a stronger traditional operation. Your herd is growing, your equipment is modern, your land is healthy. You're not abandoning ranching, you're finding ways to sustain it. She was right, as usual. Within 2 months, Jake's cattle operation had expanded by 20%. The new irrigation system meant better pasture management. The conservation easement approval brought another influx of capital, and the agritourism weekends were generating income that made the ranch genuinely profitable for the first time in Jake's memory. But success brought its own complications. Elena's phone still rang, with calls from other ranchers in crisis. Desperate for the help she'd given Jake, she turned most of them away. But Jake could see the guilt in her eyes each time. "You could help them," Jake said one evening, after she'd declined another call. "I wouldn't mind. I'm exactly where I want to be." Elena set down her phone with finality. "But Jake, we should talk about what this actually means. Long term." His stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "Okay." Elena moved to sit beside him on the porch swing they'd installed last week. "I love what we're building here. I love waking up in this house, working on this ranch, being with you. But I need to know if you see this as temporary or something more permanent." Jake's heart hammered. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both aware of the question hanging between them, but afraid to force an answer. "I want it to be permanent," Jake said carefully. "But I don't want to trap you. Your work is important and you're good at it. If you need to take on other clients, if you need to travel—" "I don't want to travel," Elena interrupted. At least, not the way I used to. I've been thinking, what if I set up a consulting practice here? Help ranchers remotely, take on select local clients, but make the Broken Arrow my base. Our base. The word "our" sent warmth flooding through Jake's chest. You'd really want that. I want to build something lasting. With you, here. Elena's voice was steady, certain. I'm not saying I have all the answers yet, but I know this is where I belong. Jake pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with Montana air. Then stay. Not as a consultant or a temporary solution, but as my partner. In everything. Is that a proposal, Jake Sullivan? His breath caught. Was it? Jake pulled back to look at her face, seeing hope and nervousness and love reflected back at him. Not yet, he said honestly. When I propose, I'm going to do it right. But Elena, I'm asking you to choose this life. Choose this ranch, this community, this stubborn cowboy who couldn't see what he needed until you forced your way past his defenses. Yes. Elena's answer came without hesitation. To all of it, yes. They kissed as the sun set over the Broken Arrow, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Scout wandered over to investigate, tail wagging approval, before settling at their feet with a contented sigh. The second Henderson installment arrived right on schedule, bringing fresh opportunities. Elena and Jake sat down to plan the next phase, expanding the guest cabins, upgrading the main house, hiring permanent staff for the agritourism operation. They moved through decisions with practiced ease, finishing each other's sentences and building on each other's ideas. We should host a community event, Elena suggested during one planning session. Invite the neighbors, show them what we're really doing here. Let them see that this isn't about abandoning tradition, it's about preserving it. Jake loved the idea. They planned a fall harvest celebration, inviting everyone from the valley. Elena coordinated food and activities, while Jake focused on showcasing the ranch improvements. His mother offered to help, arriving a week early with her sister and enough baking supplies to feed an army. The day of the celebration dawned clear and perfect. Neighbors arrived skeptically but left impressed. Tom Bradshaw brought his family, spending hours examining the new veterinary facilities Jake had built with conservation easement funds. Other ranchers asked detailed questions about the agritourism model, some admitting they might need similar solutions to survive. Henderson showed up, unexpected and unwelcome, but his attitude had changed. "You've done well, Sullivan," he said grudgingly, surveying the transformed property. "Better than I expected. Couldn't have done it without the right help," Jake replied, watching Elena coordinate a group of children learning to rope fence posts. "Smart man, holding on to her," Henderson observed. "My lawyer said she's one of the sharpest negotiators he's faced." After Henderson left, Jake's uncle pulled him aside. "Your father would be proud, son. You saved this place when everyone thought it was impossible." Jake's throat tightened with emotion. "We saved it, Elena and I together. That's how the best things are built," his uncle replied. "Together." As evening fell and guests departed with full bellies and warm goodbyes, Jake and Elena stood in the barn that had become her first office, now transformed into a beautiful event space. String lights glowed overhead, and traces of the day's celebration lingered in the air. "Thank you," Jake said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I was too stubborn to accept help. For seeing potential where I only saw failure. For staying when you could have left." Jake took both her hands. "For choosing this life with me," Elena smiled, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "Best decision I ever made." They stood together in the barn built by Jake's great-grandfather. Surrounded by the evidence of their combined efforts, a ranch saved, a community rebuilt, and a future that stretched out before them, full of possibility. The Broken Arrow Ranch had been passed down through generations, each leaving their mark on the land. Now Jake and Elena were writing their own chapter, proving that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to fight for together. And somewhere in Billings, Jake's mother was already planning a wedding, certain that her matchmaking instincts and her sister's traditional wisdom had created the perfect match after all. 6 months after Elena Reeves had driven onto his property uninvited, Jake Sullivan stood in his bedroom holding a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was his grandmother's ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that had survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and 60 years of ranch life. "You're really doing this," he muttered to his reflection. Adjusting his collar for the 3rd time, Scout barked from downstairs, followed by Eleanor's laugh, that sound that had become as essential to Jake as morning coffee or Montana sunsets. She thought they were just riding out to check the new fence line in the eastern pasture. She had no idea Jake had spent the last week preparing something entirely different. The ranch had continued its transformation through winter and into early spring. The agritourism program now ran year-round with seasonal activities, cattle drives in summer, harvest experiences in fall, and winter sleigh rides that had proven unexpectedly popular. Margaret's cooking had attracted attention from food bloggers, and the Broken Arrow was being featured in travel magazines as an authentic Western destination. But more than the financial success, the ranch felt alive again. Laughter echoed through the barns, guests left reviews praising the genuine warmth they'd experienced. And Jake had hired 5 full-time employees who treated the land with the same respect his family always had. Elena had established her consulting practice in the converted foreman's cabin, working with ranchers across 3 states via video calls while remaining anchored to the Broken Arrow. She'd saved 4 more properties from foreclosure, her reputation growing with each success. "Jake, are you coming?" Elena called up the stairs. "Daylight's burning." He pocketed the ring box and headed down, finding her in the kitchen packing sandwiches and thermoses. She'd braided her dark hair, practical for riding, and wore the turquoise shirt he'd given her for Christmas. The sight of her moving comfortably through his kitchen still made his heart skip. "Ready," Jake said, grabbing his hat. "Though I thought we might take the long route through the Ridge Trail." Elena's eyes narrowed playfully. "The Ridge Trail adds 2 hours. What are you up to, Sullivan?" "Can't a man want to enjoy a beautiful day with a beautiful woman?" Smooth. She handed him a thermos. "But suspicious. You've been weird all week." They rode out on horseback, Scout racing ahead through the spring grass that had turned the pastures emerald. The 3rd Henderson installment had arrived last month, and Jake had used part of it to buy 2 quality horses specifically for the ranch tours. Elena's mare, a gentle chestnut named Honey, had become her favorite. She was right, as usual. Within 2 months, Jake's cattle operation had expanded by 20%. The new irrigation system meant better pasture management. The conservation easement approval brought another influx of capital. And the agritourism weekends were generating income that made the ranch genuinely profitable for the first time in Jake's memory. But success brought its own complications. Elena's phone still rang, with calls from other ranchers in crisis. Desperate for the help she'd given Jake, she turned most of them away. But Jake could see the guilt in her eyes each time. "You could help them," Jake said one evening, after she'd declined another call. "I wouldn't mind. I'm exactly where I want to be." Elena set down her phone with finality. "But Jake, we should talk about what this actually means. Long term." His stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "Okay." Elena moved to sit beside him on the porch swing they'd installed last week. "I love what we're building here. I love waking up in this house, working on this ranch, being with you. But I need to know if you see this as temporary or something more permanent." Jake's heart hammered. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both aware of the question hanging between them, but afraid to force an answer. "I want it to be permanent," Jake said carefully. "But I don't want to trap you. Your work is important and you're good at it. If you need to take on other clients, if you need to travel—" "I don't want to travel," Elena interrupted. "At least, not the way I used to. I've been thinking, what if I set up a consulting practice here? Help ranchers remotely, take on select local clients, but make the Broken Arrow my base." "Our base?" The word "our" sent warmth flooding through Jake's chest. "You'd really want that?" "I want to build something lasting. With you, here." Elena's voice was steady, certain. I'm not saying I have all the answers yet, but I know this is where I belong. Jake pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with Montana air. Then stay. Not as a consultant or a temporary solution, but as my partner. In everything. Is that a proposal, Jake Sullivan? His breath caught. Was it? Jake pulled back to look at her face, seeing hope and nervousness and love reflected back at him. Not yet, he said honestly. When I propose, I'm going to do it right. But Elena, I'm asking you to choose this life. Choose this ranch, this community, this stubborn cowboy who couldn't see what he needed until you forced your way past his defenses. Yes. Elena's answer came without hesitation. To all of it, yes. They kissed as the sun set over the broken arrow, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Scout wandered over to investigate, tail wagging approval, before settling at their feet with a contented sigh. The second Henderson installment arrived right on schedule, bringing fresh opportunities. Elena and Jake sat down to plan the next phase, expanding the guest cabins, upgrading the main house, hiring permanent staff for the agritourism operation. They moved through decisions with practiced ease, finishing each other's sentences and building on each other's ideas. We should host a community event, Elena suggested during one planning session. Invite the neighbors, show them what we're really doing here. Let them see that this isn't about abandoning tradition, it's about preserving it. Jake loved the idea. They planned a fall harvest celebration, inviting everyone from the valley. Elena coordinated food and activities, while Jake focused on showcasing the ranch improvements. His mother offered to help, arriving a week early with her sister and enough baking supplies to feed an army. The day of the celebration dawned clear and perfect. Neighbors arrived skeptically but left impressed. Tom Bradshaw brought his family, spending hours examining the new veterinary facilities Jake had built with conservation easement funds. Other ranchers asked detailed questions about the agritourism model, some admitting they might need similar solutions to survive. Henderson showed up, unexpected and unwelcome, but his attitude had changed. "You've done well, Sullivan," he said grudgingly, surveying the transformed property. "Better than I expected. Couldn't have done it without the right help," Jake replied, watching Elena coordinate a group of children learning to rope fence posts. "Smart man, holding on to her," Henderson observed. "My lawyer said she's one of the sharpest negotiators he's faced." After Henderson left, Jake's uncle pulled him aside. "Your father would be proud, son. You saved this place when everyone thought it was impossible." Jake's throat tightened with emotion. "We saved it, Elena and I together. That's how the best things are built," his uncle replied. "Together." As evening fell and guests departed with full bellies and warm goodbyes, Jake and Elena stood in the barn that had become her first office, now transformed into a beautiful event space. String lights glowed overhead, and traces of the day's celebration lingered in the air. "Thank you," Jake said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I was too stubborn to accept help. For seeing potential where I only saw failure. For staying when you could have left." Jake took both her hands. "For choosing this life with me," Elena smiled, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "Best decision I ever made." They stood together in the barn built by Jake's great-grandfather. Surrounded by the evidence of their combined efforts, a ranch saved, a community rebuilt, and a future that stretched out before them, full of possibility. The Broken Arrow Ranch had been passed down through generations, each leaving their mark on the land. Now Jake and Elena were writing their own chapter, proving that sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to fight for together. And somewhere in Billings, Jake's mother was already planning a wedding, certain that her matchmaking instincts and her sister's traditional wisdom had created the perfect match after all. 6 months after Elena Reeves had driven onto his property uninvited, Jake Sullivan stood in his bedroom holding a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was his grandmother's ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that had survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and 60 years of ranch life. "You're really doing this," he muttered to his reflection, adjusting his collar for the third time. Scout barked from downstairs, followed by Eleanor's laugh, that sound that had become as essential to Jake as morning coffee or Montana sunsets. She thought they were just riding out to check the new fence line in the eastern pasture. She had no idea Jake had spent the last week preparing something entirely different. The ranch had continued its transformation through winter and into early spring. The agritourism program now ran year-round with seasonal activities, cattle drives in summer, harvest experiences in fall, and winter sleigh rides that had proven unexpectedly popular. Margaret's cooking had attracted attention from food bloggers, and the Broken Arrow was being featured in travel magazines as an authentic Western destination. But more than the financial success, the ranch felt alive again. Laughter echoed through the barns, guests left reviews praising the genuine warmth they'd experienced. And Jake had hired 5 full-time employees who treated the land with the same respect his family always had. Elena had established her consulting practice in the converted foreman's cabin, working with ranchers across 3 states via video calls while remaining anchored to the Broken Arrow. She'd saved 4 more properties from foreclosure, her reputation growing with each success. "Jake, are you coming?" Elena called up the stairs. "Daylight's burning." He pocketed the ring box and headed down, finding her in the kitchen packing sandwiches and thermoses. She'd braided her dark hair, practical for riding, and wore the turquoise shirt he'd given her for Christmas. The sight of her moving comfortably through his kitchen still made his heart skip. "Ready," Jake said, grabbing his hat. "Though I thought we might take the long route." "Through the ridge trail." Elena's eyes narrowed playfully. "The ridge trail adds 2 hours. What are you up to, Sullivan?" "Can't a man want to enjoy a beautiful day with a beautiful woman?" Smooth. She handed him a thermos. "But suspicious. You've been weird all week." They rode out on horseback, Scout racing ahead through the spring grass that had turned the pastures emerald. The 3rd Henderson installment had arrived last month, and Jake had used part of it to buy 2 quality horses specifically for the ranch tours. Elena's mare, a gentle chestnut named Honey, had become her favorite. The ridge trail wound through the property's most scenic areas, past the creek that now flowed reliably thanks to improved water management, through stands of cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out, and eventually up to a high point that overlooked the entire valley. Jake had been up here yesterday with Tom's help, setting up what he hoped would be a perfect surprise. His heart pounded as they crested the final rise. "Oh my God," Eleanor breathed, reining Honey to a stop. "Someone, Tom, bless him, had set up a simple picnic area under the old oak tree that marked the property's highest point. A blanket, flowers in a jar, and the kind of thoughtful touches that made the gesture romantic without being overdone. "Jake, what is this?" "Needed to talk to you somewhere special," Jake said, dismounting and helping Elena down. His hands lingered on her waist, steadying himself as much as her. "This spot, my grandfather proposed to my grandmother right here." "Same tree, different generation?" Elena's eyes widened with understanding. "Jake, let me get this out before I lose my nerve." Jake took both her hands, his thumb rubbing circles on her palms. "When you showed up here, I was drowning. Not just financially, but in every way that matters. I'd convinced myself that asking for help meant I'd failed, that I had to carry everything alone, or I wasn't man enough to deserve this land." A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the valley. "You didn't just save the ranch with your spreadsheets and water rights law," Jake continued. "You saved me from the isolation I'd built around myself. You showed me that partnership isn't weakness. It's the strongest foundation there is. Every morning, I wake up grateful that you refused to leave when I told you to go." Elena's eyes were glistening now, her grip on his hands tightening. "I love you, Elena Reeves. I love your stubbornness and your brilliant mind, and the way you argue with me when you know I'm wrong. I love that you see potential in broken things and fight like hell to fix them. I love that you chose this life, this ranch, and this cowboy who didn't know he was looking for you until you were already here." Jake released one of her hands to retrieve the ring box from his pocket, dropping to one knee on the blanket. Elena's free hand flew to her mouth. "This was my grandmother's ring. It's not fancy, but it survived hard times and represented a marriage that lasted 57 years. I'm hoping you'll wear it and build that kind of future with me. Elena, will you marry me?" For a terrifying moment, Elena just stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Then she was pulling him up, kissing him with an enthusiasm that sent his hat tumbling into the grass. "Yes," she gasped between kisses. "Yes, absolutely yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, relief and joy flooding through him. It fit perfectly. He'd guessed her size based on a ring she occasionally wore, and his mother had helped with adjustments. "I can't believe you planned all this," Elena said, admiring the ring through her tears. "The picnic, the location, Tom helping set up. How long have you been plotting?" 3 weeks. "Tom can't keep a secret to save his life, so I only told him yesterday." Jake pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent. "My mother, on the other hand, has been planning our wedding since approximately day 2 of you being here." Elena laughed. "I'd expect nothing less. Should we call her? Let's have this moment first. Just us and the ranch and the future we're going to build together." They sat on the blanket, Elena tucked against Jake's side, looking out over the Broken Arrow Ranch. From this height, they could see everything: the main house with its fresh paint, the renovated barn that housed guests who'd fall in love with Montana during their stay, the healthy cattle grazing in lush pastures, and the creek glinting silver in the afternoon sun. "Tell me what you're thinking," Elena said softly. "That my grandfather would like you. That you understand what this place means in a way most people never could." Jake pressed a kiss to her temple. "That I'm the luckiest man in Montana." "Second luckiest," Elena corrected. "I'm the luckiest woman, so you can't have the top spot." They stayed on the ridge until sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. Scout had found them an hour earlier and now dozed contentedly in a patch of sunshine. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, Elena kept stealing glances at her ring, smiling like she couldn't quite believe it was real. News of their engagement spread through the valley faster than wildfire. Carol arrived the next morning with his aunt, both women already discussing venues and dates and flowers. Tom showed up with a bottle of whiskey to congratulate Jake properly. Even Henderson sent a card, brief but genuine, wishing them well. The wedding itself happened 3 months later on the Broken Arrow Ranch, naturally. They married on the ridge under that same oak tree, with 200 guests witnessing the union of a stubborn cowboy and the consultant who'd saved his ranch and captured his heart. Carol cried through the entire ceremony. Elena's aunt took full credit for the match, reminding anyone who'd listen that she'd known from the beginning they were perfect for each other. And when Jake kissed his bride as the sun set over Sullivan Land, everyone present understood they were witnessing more than a wedding. They were witnessing the continuation of a legacy. Elena Sullivan, she'd chosen to take his name, became as essential to the Broken Arrow as the land itself. Her consulting practice thrived, saving ranch after ranch from foreclosure while she remained rooted in the place she'd chosen as home. Jake's operation expanded steadily, balanced between tradition and innovation, proving that preserving the past didn't mean rejecting the future. Years later, when their daughter asked how Mommy and Daddy met, Jake and Elena would smile at each other across the dinner table, sharing the story of an unwanted consultant and a desperate cowboy who found in each other exactly what they'd been missing. The Broken Arrow Ranch had survived another generation, not through stubbornness alone, but through partnership, love, and the understanding that sometimes the help we need most arrives uninvited and changes everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.